Hello and welcome to the Awakened Intimacy podcast. My name is Aaron.
And I'm Greer.
We're so thrilled to welcome you to this very intimate podcast. Today we decided to weave some of the topics that we've previously spoken about and bring it all together through the narration and deep sharing of Greer's personal story. Because when it comes to really honouring one's truth and expressing what wants to be really lived as the truth in the heart, Greer really embodies that. And a lot of couples that come to us are in that relationship reckoning phase and are really asking themselves some really deep, powerful and important questions. And as someone who has really lived that and walked that path, we wanted to create this opportunity to get a real insight into how honouring that path and answering those questions honestly can lead one into true love. So, Greasy, tell me, when was that time in your life when you had your first real reckoning?
Well, probably the first time was so let me just step back a little bit. I grew up in a very loving, safe home. My parents modelled a pretty healthy marriage, and I had always had a pretty close group of friends, felt pretty secure. And when I was 17, I went on exchange and I left, just turned 17, like 2 weeks prior, 17-year-old virgin who, had partied a bit and it wasn't like a straighty 180, straighty 80, but I was still young. And my year overseas was so powerful for many reasons. It was a huge initiation into living with a family that was very unsafe. There was abuse there, that I had to find myself somewhere to live. I didn't speak the language when I got there. And this was before email. It was before social. So I really was on the other side of the world. And I ended up going into a relationship with a man who was much older. He had a child, and he introduced me to the worlds of rave and all that entails. And when I came home, and all of his friends were 10 years older. So when I came home, and there was mafia connections, like it was a whole story in of itself. And when I came home and back to my friendship circle, I had changed a lot. I'd grown up massively, and I was older. I felt older. I thought I was older than what I really was. And so, there was that young naivety of like, oh, I've experienced so much, and yet I was still only just 18. But I remember it really was challenging to come back into this world and see my friends and anyone who has traveled knows this. When we go off and we go on that first hero's journey, so much happens, and it's hard if we come home, especially if we're the first amongst our family or our friendship group who experiences that, to relate in a new way. So that took time of adjusting and feeling into if, does this still fit? And I think that because, I was still so young and I went on to college and all my friends were here, it ended up being that I ended up I opened my friends into the world of raves and all that entails. And so I kind of brought them in with me. But that was the first time that I was like, are these friendships still a fit? And I went back to France the following year, so a year later, and that deep reckoning came with my first partner when I became aware that I was actually in an emotionally toxic and unsafe relationship, and that I'd allowed myself somehow to fall into a dynamic that I never saw myself being in. And I was very fortunate in that it was a twist of fate and synchronicity that led me to being in a moment where I was at the travel agent. I was enrolled at uni there, so I was about to go and formally study at university in France, and I was booking a trip to come home just before my uni started, because that was going to be 4 years that I'd be based there. And I won't go into the full story of it, but I remember in that moment tuning in, do I buy a return trip or do I actually just buy a one-way back to Tasmania and then decide if I want to come back then? And in the end, I realized that my fear was if I book a one-way, my fear is that I won't want to come back. And unfortunately, I had an older friend who heard I spoke that to her, and she said, honey, if the fear is that you'll go home and you'll realize you don't want to come back, then you need to go home. And that was probably one of the first reckoning of me trusting of what I was being drawn to. And that at that time, that was strong because leaving that relationship entailed leaving my first love, my whole world in France. That was so hard to leave, but what I could say yes to was what was calling me home and what I knew my first step was, which was to come home.
Okay, so you left what you knew and had the courage to leave that situation.
Mm-hmm.
How did that benefit you?
Well, it benefited me from, it's a bit like the analogy of a fish being in water and that a fish doesn't know that it's in water because it's living in water. And so leaving that situation helped me realize the little bubble that I'd been living in and rediscover a new level of myself outside of that circle.
So what was that bubble?
Enmeshed relationship.
So
Codependency. Trying desperately to meet my partner's needs and pleasing, and being fearful of rocking the boat. I didn't want to bring things up. It meant me sweeping things under the carpet. And it also meant that I was questioning myself, these things that felt wrong and I was trying to put a stand for. When it wasn't being met, I was kind of like, like almost narcissistic tendencies of his.
But on your side, it was self-abandonment.
Yeah, self-abandonment, I wouldn't quite use that word. I would say I didn't quite have the willingness to really stand up for myself. So I wasn't abandoning myself, although I was heavily, I'd put on quite a lot of weight. So I was definitely suppressing through food. And I was very bored a lot of the time. I was really bored, hence the food as well. And I was also still smoking quite a bit. We smoked quite a lot of hashish in France, and drinking pretty regularly too. And I think I was just going along with a commitment that I'd made when I was, and this is interesting because I made the commitment to return to France when, 6 months prior. And that kind of led me to realize, and this pattern carried on for a long time, is that I would make a decision, and then because the gift of it is loyalty and commitment and devotion, but the shadow side of that gift is that I would deny and I would suppress and I would keep towing the line because of a decision that I'd made previously. And when I think back to it, when I made the decision to go back to France, I was only 18 and a half. I was so young. And it was a year and a half later that I knew that this wasn't working for me, but because I'd committed, I didn't want to hurt my partner. And he had a very, very challenging life, and I didn't want to be another person to break his heart because I cared deeply for him. I loved him deeply, but I knew the love that I was receiving. And for many, many years, for 20 years, until I met you, I didn't think I'd ever meet someone who loved me that intensely. It was a very intense love, and it was a love born of trauma and pain and ownership and attachment. But it was fierce, it was passionate, and that was the first love that I knew. So even though it was very different to the love that was modeled by my parents, and even though I didn't consciously rebel against that in any way, there was something very magnetic about that fiery love, even though, again, the gift of the fire is that it's passionate and it's warm and exciting and enlivening, but the shadow is that it burns, it dissimulates, it tears you down. It led me in shreds. And yeah.
Well, it's very interesting that you married me, who has a lot of that fire.
Well, you're a balance.
Yeah.
It's like I often teach,
I haven't heard you
I've always been,
talk about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're more integrated in your fire.
Yay.
And I was on a women's call this morning and a group call, and I was sharing, we were talking about boundaries, and I'll often use my hand as metaphor that, if I was and really if I look at how my parents were, who I wouldn't say avoided fighting, but one of the reasons why I've really had to learn to be comfortable with fire and anger is that I think I saw my parents, I don't know if I ever actually saw them fight. I saw them disagree strongly maybe 3 times or so, and I can still remember how that felt in my body, but I had a very amicable relationship, and so I didn't know how to be around that. And so I went from that to the extreme of that to, where at one point my life was threatened, to I had to swing that way to come into balance. But again, I went from modeling my parents this to like this other direction, and now I've come back here with you. And ultimately that's a reflection of me and my journey with those different energies, those different ways of expressing and finding what actually is what really serves me and what's the highest for me, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, as you know.
Yeah.
But it's also not killing myself in the process and having boundaries around that.
Yeah. Do you think that first relationship had an impact on, well, consciously or unconsciously? Do you feel like that had an impact for what made you feel safe and comfortable for your next phase of relationships?
Well, I mean, that relationship definitely had an impact on me, but I remember what it really did was give me deep compassion and empathy for women and men, but as women who stay in relationships that are damaging. I just could never, and again, because it wasn't what was modeled to me, and my father was very safe, my mother very supportive. I just couldn't understand why would someone stay in a relationship, and I really don't know. I like to think that I would have, but I really don't know if I would have been able to get out of that relationship if I didn't have that whole half a planet in between. Like, it was very enmeshed. It had a real grip on me, and I'm very fortunate that on the day that I went to buy my ticket home, which was going to be a return ticket, that the man I was with wanted to stay home and smoke and play video games. And so it meant that I was at that travel agent on my own. Because again, this is before internet. So I couldn't go and just book my flight. I had to drive for an hour. And yeah, and I think, and it's interesting because I came home, I quickly came into a new relationship with someone who I had known, and that wasn't my plan, but it kind of happened, and we weren't serious. He was moving to Sydney, and so it was kind of on again, off again for a couple of years. But we ended up getting engaged. We ended up getting married. And so I really didn't have time to really be with myself, because even though he had moved to Sydney, again, I'd started this heart thread with him, and I didn't mean to, but I kind of went from one connection to another. And that seems to be, I don't know, that seems to be my path in this time. But even though he was in Sydney and we weren't fully committed, I did have a couple of experiences outside of that, but not a lot. I kind of, well, I like him now, so I need to be with him. It was that kind of thing. And it actually, before we were engaged, I had a job interview, and I thought I was going, because my background's, I'd been to uni, and I have a degree in another totally different master's degree in a different world. And I was offered a job, and I thought that the job would be based in Sydney in the Blue Mountains, where I was staying at the time. And then upon being offered the job, I realised I'd be based in London. And I'm pretty sure that you would have been in London soon after that. I'm sure I would have been guiding you. I would have met up with you at some point. And that was a reckoning in and of itself that I don't know, it's hard to say that I regret, because ultimately that led on to my life path, going down the other path. But it was a clear example where if I had have honoured my truth and let go of the fear of hurting someone, I would have chosen something else very different.
So just to summarize before we continue to move forward, because I know you don't really resonate with that word self-abandonment, but it is something that I often hear clients use and people that are in that more enmeshed dynamic or putting someone else's needs first. It's often a term that's used. So how do you feel or how do you think that your family of origin impacted this dynamic of you like not really standing up for yourself, not honoring your truth, not feeling like you could really go for what your heart really desired?
Well, it's funny because in you saying, I know you don't resonate with self-abandonment, when you sound like, oh no, I was totally self-abandoning.
Okay, great.
I just hadn't quite been able to see that until now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really was. Oh my gosh. Blind spot. So obvious. This is what happens with blind spots. Thank you for illuminating me.
It's okay.
Such is the power of conscious relationship and conscious inquiry and curiosity.
All right. So there's been this thread of self-abandonment throughout your story up
Since as long
until-
as I can remember, I've been abandoning myself.
Well, I think you've come a long way
I have come a long way.
in the last few years.
So,
but
okay, it's a good question.
in terms of the narrative, the story you've been telling, there's been self-abandonment weaved throughout.
Yeah. Yes, it's abandoning the self so as to fit into the ecosystem in which I was in. And this is the shadow side of being in a family that's very close and connected in that, and where, you know, I had such deep love and respect for my dad, I was so close with my mum. We were really great friends. There was a period in my teenage years where I like hated her, but on the whole, very close. And I say that somewhat jokingly, but I did have a period of like, and so the cost of that is that it led me to really deny myself, to make subtly, unconsciously, and this is the problem with our unconscious behaviors, not listen to myself. And one of the first times I remember that is in when it came to college. So I was only 16 and choosing my college subjects, and I really wanted to do drama. And my dad and mum really encouraged me to just do pre-tertiary. So I did do outdoor ed.
There it is.
Yeah, adventure.
That's part of how your family origin, like, although they had your, you know, quote unquote best interests at heart, they thought they were doing you a service. Yeah.
Yeah.
It came across as loving and caring, but yet it was actually teaching you to deny, you know, your truth and what your desires and heart really yearned for.
Yeah, and that's tricky because what that brings up for me is our middle child saying to us just the other day that she wants to play footy, and us going, oh, no, don't play footy.
Yeah, well.
So I'm doing the same thing to my kids, but I do feel that she's doing that for other reasons rather than it's because she really had that call. So
we shared our perspective. We didn't. We're not going to force her not to do
I won't
it.
not let her. But yeah. Anyway, so where was I at?
It's been these threads of self-abandonment, and now you're in a relationship with a man who's in Sydney. You had a job opportunity to go to London, but you didn't take it.
Yeah, and if I backtrack, also that whole tertiary, the pre-tertiaries, focusing on the pre-tertiaries, again, it was so that I could stay in my system. I had a father who was very practical, as a man of the real world, but he was highly intelligent, very highly studied. And mum wasn't, but that we were still in that world. And she was still trained. She was a very good nurse. And so that essentially led me to go to uni after I came back from exchange. And I will say also that I remember even when I was 16 and we had someone come to our school to talk about their school exchange experience, international exchange, I remember really clearly saying at the dinner table, oh, we had someone come and talk about going on exchange, and if I wasn't in year 12 next year, I'd consider doing it. But, you know, I'm in year 12, so I need to focus. And I was 16. And it was my dad. So this is that how dad said to me afterwards, you know, if you want to go on exchange, we can explore that. So They were very supportive, and 2 weeks later, it was happening. Like within a month, we'd found a family, and I was leaving. So, but it did lead me to go to uni. This isn't quite relationship reckoning with something with another person, but halfway through my uni degree, I clearly remember just being so depressed. I was binge drinking so much. I would go to my lectures, I'd get the uni assignment, like, right, this uni assignment, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to get my photocopies and highlight all my bits. I'm going to write the exam, like the essay, and every single time I would just not do it until the day before it was due, highly stressed, and I'd always hand it in. I just came to accept that I needed to lose 5% of my marks. I needed to get 5% better than what I was going to get because it would be subtracted. So I share all that because halfway through my degree, I remember going to my professor and in tears saying, I just don't think, I was learning about the tourism industry and the impact on the environment and on cultures. Like, I don't want to be in this. I was learning about government policy and the bureaucracy, and like, I don't want to be doing this. And he assured me that it was fine. I was just having my first quarter life crisis and I just get through and I'd be okay. And again, I took that model of professor, someone outside of me who has lived more, to know what I needed. And so I went, okay, I'll just do it. And so I continued on to binge eat, binge drink, toe the line. And so that was really a reckoning with a relationship with a system outside of myself, that I knew it wasn't for me, but it's what everyone around me was doing. So I just continued along. So I had multiple reckonings where I didn't listen to myself and self-abandoned.
Yeah, which, led you into a marriage, and, that marriage, from what I've heard you say, looked good on paper. And then it also came to a point where that self-abandonment pattern, just couldn't be denied anymore. So, I think it's a great opportunity to start to dive into that.
Yeah, and I want to preface the delicacy of this topic. I had 2 children with my first husband, and we continue to co-parent, and they're in our lives, and I have deep care and love and respect, and I take full responsibility in my role and my choices. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and it was too much, to be honest with myself. So I just wasn't honest with myself because the consequences of that was too great. And there were multiple times where I could have made a different choice and I didn't, because I loved this person and I had a belief about love, that love doesn't hurt, love doesn't walk away. And so there was the marriage, which included a very, very close family who were very connected and which I had become a part of. And what happened is that as my journey and who I was becoming, I started to go down my spiritual path. I started stepping onto my path when I was 15, when had an eating disorder, and that led me to start to inquire, like, wow, why have I've had such a good childhood, and yet why am I doing this to myself? So I started at the 15 of the self-development, self-inquiry. And then through my 20s, I had girlfriends from high school. We were best mates. We had matching tattoos. We saw each other get married. We were one another's bridesmaids. We witnessed one another become mothers. Like, we had, we partied together. We hung out together. We had a very close bond. But again, I didn't realize that because I was so ingrained in that system, I'd become I'd become enmeshed to it. I'd become attached to it and was so committed to being part of the whole and fitting in that I didn't really allow myself to come out. And although I was being myself, but because I was in that particular setting, and anyone knows this, of being around different groups, different cultures, that when we travel, we different parts of ourselves show up. And so because I was so in that system, my spiritual side, because that wasn't necessarily a part of that, although it was never shunned, it wasn't something that was actively explored and encouraged and that we did together. So I just started to feel myself kind of fractaling out, for want of a better word. And by that stage I was married, and so I kind of transitioned from the high school group into the social group of my husband at the time, and I just became in that. And so I'm seeing like a disco ball with all these little glitter bits. I came out of that and then I came into that. And again,
you just went from one enmeshment to another.
Yeah. And they were good friends. They were my best friends. I loved them. And I was a certain version of myself. What?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm noticing this pattern of not wanting to offend.
Oh yeah. We had a discussion about that just yesterday, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So because I didn't witness people offending one another. One of the I don't remember a lot of my childhood, but I remember, and I've shared this with you, being at the dinner table when, and unbeknownst to us, Mum and Dad were going through a very difficult time at that time, and we had little money. We'd lost a lot of money, and my sisters asked my mum, "What's for dessert?" And one of them said, "What's for dessert?" And then the other, or maybe I asked, "What's for dessert?" And then my two sisters said, "Stewed fruit and ice cream," because that's what we always had. Stewed fruit from the trees in the backyard and plain vanilla ice cream. And they were taking the piss of my mum that that's all she provided. And I remember my mum just sitting, she just broke down and cried. It's one of the only times I've seen my mum, well, it's the only time I've seen my mum break down and cry. But I remember in that moment having such a physical, like, I think what happened is that unconsciously I just kind of moved myself. I was like, I'm never going to do that to someone. I'm never going to hurt someone. And this was unconscious, of course. But I think that moment that set me on the path of pleasing.
100%. And it's a great example, and something I want to interject with here is when it comes to our conditioning and childhood conditioning, we can either model and replicate what the behavior was around us, or we can rebel against it. So in this example, rather than modeling and taking on kind of that meanness, you went the other way and rebelled against that meanness and totally pushed that away of never being mean. And there's a shadow side to that of also not really standing in your truth, which could offend, which often does rock the boat, and it sometimes the truth hurts.
Yeah, and I'll just tweak that slightly and say, rather than saying, all right, I'm never going to be mean and I'm going to become mean, it's like, I'm never going to offend. I'm not going to risk offending someone.
Exactly, yeah. Well, and that's exactly like, that's not rocking the boat.
Yeah.
Pleasing.
Yeah.
That's a great example of how that little moment had such a profound impact on who you became for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, and so
you went from one enmeshment to the other?
I went from one enmeshment to the other. And again, these weren't, apart from the enmeshment with my first boyfriend, they weren't bad. They weren't toxic per se. They were my best friends. I could tell them anything. And it's that whole thing of what we teach in our couples work, and when we're coming into deeper honesty, that we can only be as honest with our partner as we are with ourselves. And because I had self-abandoned, it's so clear that that's what I was doing. And it's actually good that even now I hadn't quite realised the level of self-abandonment, because I was abandoning from the self-abandoning. I wasn't in it to know, but I knew that something was wrong, and I judged myself. I judged myself so hard. Why am I still overeating? Why am I saying I'm not going to drink tonight and then I do? My life is so good. What's wrong with me? And I had, dipped in and out of mild depression, and it was because I was suppressing who I was. I wasn't being honest with myself, because if I was honest with myself, I might offend, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to... So there were continual reckoning, and it's interesting. I had a very good girlfriend of mine, shout out to Amy Murphy, the one and only. She had a dinner with me and my old circle and all that community. And she said to me afterwards, and she knew me in a different light because I'd met her through different angle and we were doing spiritual work together. And she still says, I'll never forget that evening of watching you and then seeing you in the group. And it's not that I was ever pretending to be I wasn't faking, but she said, you're such a different you're a different little, almost like you don't belong. Your truth is not there. And her words are more profound than that. But it just was so clear for her, who knew me from another angle, and the difference with fortunately for me, my spiritual path, it has been somewhere where I haven't been enmeshed. I haven't followed one path and had one guru. I've had multiple teachers who I've loved and deeply appreciate and continue to appreciate and studied with, and none of them have been dogmatic. So I've been fortunate that in my spirituality, I haven't actually done that, and I've stayed really open to the many great wisdom teachings on the planet.
Yeah, and what Amy was referring to is how we often have different personas around different people, and I know I can relate to this, and it was a pivotal point of my awakening as a 21-year-old. Was I was wearing a certain persona and mask around my friends, and then I was a completely different person. I was the good boy around my family, and it required me to have lies and to build up these false narratives to maintain both masks. And I hated it because any love and praise or admiration would go to the mask. I couldn't actually receive it. And it left me feeling so empty and so void of the love I was truly craving, and felt totally disconnected from. And, part of my conditioning was I thought I had to be the good boy to get the safety, the connection, the praise, the admiration, the presence that, I yearned for as a child. So I also had my own conditioning in that way.
I'm smiling because when it comes to me and my drawing to you, it was exactly what you not being that's what drew me to you.
100%. Yeah.
And naughtiness. Yeah. And I just want to reiterate too, these are subtle nuances. And so it's not necessarily being fully fake, although that can be the extreme of it. It's a good example of like only showing myself in the good light. So if I turn the camera and go like this, if you're watching, like at the moment I've got my chin down, I've got a double chin, I don't look very attractive. I go like this is how me, but I can also like, how people take photos and they angle it the right way.
Yeah.
That's a good example of people going like this and they see a photo. And I mean, there's so many photos where I have my eyes closed, so we do have to change them and redo them. But we can show ourselves in our light. And I was reflecting, I would hold myself in a way subtly that would meet the approval of those that I was around. And what that meant is I had lost touch with my natural stance, my natural gait, and they were very subtle. And all of my work in my women's work, when I'm working with women, it's almost always the subtle work that I do and just making those little shifts, because when we shift from that inner point at the depth of our being, that has a huge impact on our being. And that's where we come up to Dad and his diagnosis, because that was really the next level there.
Yeah, and I remember when we met, you were still right in the depths of grieving that. So how did that impact, your view on life and what was really important to you?
So I think it was only a couple of months before my dad's diagnosis that I was doing one of my spiritual classes, my meditation classes, and I'd started teaching by this time. And my teacher at the time took me through a meditation. I had this vision of me living on land and having a retreat centre. And at the end of that session, it became apparent that the only retreat venue that I knew of in Tasmania was actually for sale. I knew the family who owned it, and I knew the real estate person who was owning it. And I came out of that session going, oh my God, we could buy a retreat centre. I could live there. I could host retreats. I can do the food, and I can also run my own retreats, and other people come. And it was just every single part of I can still feel it in my sacral, lit up. It's like, oh my gosh, that's it. It's freaking it. Because I'd gone back to some consultancy work in my professional area, and I hated it. And I was still drinking lots and taking lots of recreational drugs. And I was like, and I remember coming home and saying to my husband at the time, going, this is for sale. We can buy this and I can do that. And you can, and he was just like, what? And what am I going to do? And it was just like, I remember this clear, it was like in this moment in my mind, I'm seeing like a huge sand, like a huge, not even a rock, like a ton of rock just going boom on the road and this block on the road and going, oh, so what did I do? Self-abandon, minimize. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, no, we can't really do that. It's not really possible. And so it was not that long after that. And that was a big reckoning piece that I was like, okay, well, I just won't do that and I'll quiet my heart's desire. That my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And because of the work that I'd been doing, we didn't know how long he would live for, but it had metastasized. He would be leaving the earth plane within a finite time. And I made a deep, deep commitment that with my dad, who was literally one of my best friends, I was so close to him. He was my trusted advisor. He was my friend. Again, there was a bit of enmeshment there, but there was also just so much joy and love and respect. And so I made a commitment that every time I was with him, because I was also aware that I was his little princess, his youngest of three girls, and that I looked up to him. I wouldn't say I worshipped him, but I took his word very seriously, and it really had a big impact on how I saw the world. And so it was a very risky thing of me to risk sharing a part of myself that may not actually mirror his perspective. And so from his diagnosis to when he passed was a 2-year window. And we only live 5 kilometres away from one another. I saw him pretty regularly, at least once a week. My practice was that every time I was with him, if I noticed myself trying to look just that slightly bit shiny, it's like I would just that and meet him head on. And that led to some really vulnerable conversations with him. And every time that I revealed something, bless Dad, he would go, okay. And he never judged me. He never made me wrong for any of it. He may have disagreed at times, but there was... So that experience and being able to experience that with my father, now unconsciously I can see that was a perfect training for. It was such a safe relationship. There was such unconditional love and bond there that if I could reveal all these things to him and he loved me, then maybe it is safe to be myself. And a month, 6 weeks after he passed, I had a vision. It was just before meeting you. Can I keep talking? Yeah. So I had a vision. Dad had passed. Immense grieving, immense. And he came to me in a vision in the dream state. And I won't tell the whole story, but when I saw him, he was the embodiment of divine peace, of omnipresent peace and love. And he had a bit of like Gandalf energy. He was tall and white. It was snow and sun. It was very mystical and magical. And he held out his hands and he showed me in his 2 hands that there was an egg. And he telepathically shared that within an egg, I didn't realize at the time, but as a chick is starting to form, it starts that before it's even like as the beak is forming, it's starting to tap. And essentially it does that until the moment that it's birth. And it's the tapping of the beak that cracks itself and births itself into the world. And the message was that same divine intelligence, that spark of creation that is within that little chicken that knows that it needs to do that and just keep tapping to birth, that is the same innate wisdom and spark of God consciousness that lives in our heart. And that the whole purpose of this, the whole purpose why we're here is to be honest with ourselves and with our heart. And that if we're willing to do that, we will birth ourselves. And that, I've told that story so many times and it still moves me because of the power of it. And it's such a simple teaching, and yet it changed my life so radically because I'd already seen so many of the unconscious fails. And again, because I was so thin, I didn't think they mattered, but they did. And as I let them go, and then Dad passed, and that was his parting gift to me that it just like catapulted my commitment to honoring my truth. And I'm very blessed that when we met, I still had young kids. I was married again. I was still in this loving relationship. Everything looked good. And the beauty of us meeting as friends and having a very clear boundary, it didn't even ever come up in conversation that we were just never going to be physical together. It led that having that very clear boundary meant that what we could explore was quite limitless because we didn't have to be anything for one another. I didn't have to meet your needs. You didn't have to meet my needs. I didn't have to turn you on. I didn't, it was, yeah. So do you want to speak to that?
Well, what I want to just mention on is the wisdom of your father's final teaching of that innate intelligence that lives within our heart that is wanting to birth itself, and even birthing is coming into the physical, and it's got to get through a shell, and that shell is that persona, that identity, that part of us that feels like it's got to perform or show up a certain way. It's that identity that isn't really us. Like, you could call it ego, but it could also be the people pleaser. It could be the hero child, whatever that conditioning is that makes us create a mask. Like, that's what we've got to break through in order to birth who we really are, our truth, living our truth, birthing our true selves. It's why I say, like, to so many people that come to me that are looking to deepen their spirituality, all I say is, like, it's just about being real. It's about being your most authentic self and having the courage to really live that, which it sounds simple, yet there are so many ways in which that requires a lot of courage, because really the status quo is to fit in and to deny your uniqueness and to fit into a box and to identify with your role and function in society, which our truth is we're so much more than that. It's like that's why those of us that are craving depth and craving intimacy and want to be real, we don't tolerate surface level conversations, because the surface level is that identity. It's, we go to a social setting and it's like a lot of us roll our eyes when the conversation starts with, oh, so what do you do? And it's like, oh, I'm a carpet cleaner. And it's like, it's just so surface level. And, for me, how I've counteracted that is I ask people, so what do you love to do? It's such a great way. And people are like, oh, like, what do I love to do?
Yeah.
and it's great. So just a little tip there for those of you, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, Awakened Intimacy, you're really wanting depth. You don't tolerate surface level conversations. So go take that on. And so, yeah, in terms of the safety piece of us just being very clear friends when we met, I don't think, well, I would have been too afraid to connect with you in the way that we did. Had you been single, had I been like actually really attracted to you, because for those that don't know, Greer cut her hair really short when we first met. So not only were we friends, but there was no attraction from my end.
I was not into short hair.
Yeah, no, I don't like it. So, yeah, but it just meant that, there was no trying to impress one another. I think that's really the core of it. Like, I wasn't trying to impress you. I was just being honest. And also what drew us together was that shared desire for being of service to something more than ourselves. So Greer drew me into her world by offering up the opportunity to join her network marketing. What do you call
International global team.
Yeah, it was called Life Plus. So we often joke that it was, do you want to join my Life Plus life plus me and life plus a family.
You had my baby.
Life plus a baby.
So I've just started by trying these vitamins.
And I said, look, I don't really know what this company's about, but I vibe with you. I like your, I was impressed by your shine and how open and how effortlessly you could connect with others.
Yeah,
That's
thank
what
you.
drew me into you.
Thank you. Well, and I just want to take a moment to thank you because you're so good. And this is often how it will roll when we're teaching on retreat or in session, that I always share the story and then Aaron actually brings us back to the concepts that it's founded on. So thank you for doing that. Yeah. I just really need to get a glass of water.
Okay.
So just keep it rolling. Do you want some water? I've been eating for half an hour. Yeah, so we had that window of time where we were not needing to impress one another. We were both drawn by a desire to be of purpose. We were both exploring consciousness. We were both deeply on the spiritual path. You started to come to some of the spiritual circles that I went to. You introduced me into some psychedelics in a conscious way, which was life changing. We weren't using heavily, but I had a couple. You guided me through a couple of experiences, and what I noticed, having dropped so many veils with Dad, and then getting to know you in this way that was non-physical, and I want to explicitly say that Aaron and I did not have an affair. I just want to name that because there's a period of my marriage ending that I keep private, and I don't need to disclose that. And I just want to name that. But we had a period of becoming more and more intimate with one another before my marriage ended. And it was really, as anyone who's been through a marriage separation or ended a long-term relationship, especially with children, it's very complicated and there's a lot of layers to it. And essentially I came to the realization that I was no longer willing to be to abandon. I wouldn't have used that word, but I came to know myself in this deep path, and I wanted to know all of life intimately. And if I was no longer willing to be in a romantic relationship that did not explore everything, that had space to expand and grow and deepen and really be our authentic self. And my reckoning, there was a few periods, a few stages of that, but there was a very clear moment where I just did not know what to do. My heart, I knew there was a part of me that I knew what my heart was guiding me, but it did not make sense. And for someone who didn't want to hurt someone, this was going to pull apart an entire family system, not just my husband at the time and I and our kids. There was whole family system. And I'm not a runner, but there was a day where I just put shoes on. I ran up the hill and I climbed a tree, and I found myself on the tree, and I wouldn't have used. I was to a little bit of spirit totem work then, but I kind of shape shifted into this black panther, and I just became this big cat on a tree, and I closed my eyes, and I saw two timelines, and in one timeline, I saw myself as a 50-something-year-old lady in the soccer tuck shop, and I was serving sausage rolls, and I had like tuck shop arms.
Tuck shop lady arms.
The tuck shop lady arms. And I knew which path that was. And then I saw this path that was this light, and I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what it would entail. Probably fortunately. And I knew this was the path of staying, and this was the path of leaving. And I came away from that knowing that, as a mother, it was really an opportunity to have a relationship reckoning with myself as mother, and who did I believe myself to be as mother, and who did I believe was a good mother. And essentially I chose to go from martyr to model, and that if there was one thing that I wanted to teach my daughters, it was that they know and that they live their truth. And I knew from the depths of my bones that I could not teach that to them if I did not model that. And so even though that knowing, even though the realization that marriage was closing, even though that meant the separation, the division of that family construct, I knew that that was actually that was the way that I could be the best mother. And that was a huge, huge piece. And I ended up moving, and although I only moved from one suburb to the next, literally 5 kilometers away, I also knew that as I left and I came back here to my family home, I knew that I had to leave that whole world, which meant my entire social network. And it wasn't from a place of, fuck you, you guys don't know me. It was this, oh, I don't love you anymore. I just knew that I had to unshackle myself and discover who I was, because I didn't know. I was self-abandoning. I only just realized that half an hour ago. But I knew, and I knew I had to let it go. And the most challenging thing was, and this is why, I often work with women who are really committing to their spiritual path. They may not use it as that term, but they want to be themselves. They're sick of pleasing everyone, and something has happened in their life. There's been a death, marriage is dissolution, the kids have grown up. There's been some big shift that's like, okay, I've got to get really real with myself. And that reckoning has a huge impact. And yet it's the most beautiful gift, the most important gift we can give ourselves, to be ourselves, and to ultimately where it's led me to now is that although it led to the ending of many relationships, I had a dinner with my high school friends. So these are my girlfriends who I was friends with, some of them from as early as 7, and we were very close right up into our late 20s, early 30s. And it was just literally earlier this week I had dinner with them, and I'd needed to separate myself from a long time. But now I kind of thought, I'm gonna out for dinner because I still love them all. Right? I care for them deeply. And I realized, being at this new space and level of honesty with myself, and not needing them to understand me or need to explain my path, or because I'm on a different path to them. But it was so clear that there was such deep love there. And I really came away from that dinner knowing that, wow, connection can come and go. And every now and then we'll have a week where there's not quite as much connection, or we might have a day, one of us might say, I'm feeling a bit disconnected. But the true love can't go anywhere, because it's what's really underneath those deep bonds and deep connections. And so I guess that's my parting wisdom in the relationship reckoning, that if there is true love, and, I have a place now where I can honestly say that I have, I love and deeply care for my daughter's stepmom. That this love is away from rules around what a relationship is and isn't, and a particular relationship thread. It's just love. And I think that's what we're here to do. That's why I literally have "Here to Love" tattooed on my forearm, because we're here, as Aaron was saying, we're here to, the spiritual path is awakening to our truth and being that truth, and being that emissary of our own unique fractal on that disco ball of life, shining our own light and learning to hold ourselves in the more shadowy parts of ourselves. And then in the path of awakened intimacy, it's learning, how do we learn to hold that with one another, so that in being with you, rather than being this enmeshed glob where we're together no matter what, we have to please one another, and I have to fix you and you fix me. It's like, wow, we can stand in our own wholeness with all of our parts and support. And not only can I be in my wholeness with you, but being with you helps me be even more whole. And you help, just like you did before, you help me see my blind spots from a place of curiosity and exploration, helping me see the things that I can't see because they're behind me. That's why I say I love you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
Yeah. I think it's just really important to name how, when you're in that reckoning phase, you're committing to living your truth and stop self-abandoning. That you didn't leave that marriage to be with me. You left that marriage to reclaim yourself. And part of that reckoning was you reclaiming your need for deep intimacy in relationship. I think to summarize for the listener, for someone who may be in a reckoning place, that Greer's journey of coming into true love is really that reclamation of the truth in her heart of self-love and her wholeness. It's not necessarily about our relationship. Our relationship is simply the vehicle and catalyst and container for that wholeness to be reclaimed and be embodied. If you're in a reckoning space and you're getting really clear that you might need to be leaving a relationship, your path will look different. And it may not be that your path to wholeness and your reclamation of your authenticity and who you really are is in intimate relationships straight away. It may be that you need a period of time by yourself, away from all of your known environments and all of those relationships that mirror back to you your past. Because I'm saying this because it's actually really common that someone who starts to reclaim themselves and live their truth, that they've got to say goodbye to those relationships that are bound up in past identities. And Greer lived that. And it just so happened that we ended up as a couple, but that wasn't what was the main driver for you to honor that truth.
100%. Thank you for, again, crystallizing that, because it's because of what we shared without even having sexuality in our experiences. Like, I am having that, and so I'm not going to not have that. But it wasn't, I got to leave so that I can get it from outside of me. It was like, in fact, I had a very clear intention of not being in a relationship because I'd never been single. So I didn't go from one thing to another and then to another. It was like, okay. And then it just so happened to be that was our path. But that's a really important point. And, I shared with you yesterday that I have inquired if I had in that previous relationship, when I was that place of reckoning, if I had have had the skills, the relational skills that I have now, and if I had have had someone like you and I helping that previous relationship, could we have made it through? And ultimately, I think we were on the path to be together, to do this work together. This was part of my initiation, both of our initiation. But really, I think if both partners are willing, if there's a genuine desire to commit to deeper truth, then maybe. And we do work with couples who they're at that reckoning point and they don't know if they're going to be together. And something that we commit to them is, rather than having a vested interest in them staying, it's so important that we can't be more vested in them staying together than themselves. But what our commitment to them is that we will bring them into greater awareness, truth, compassion, forgiveness, self-responsibility, and love for one another. And that is going to evolve the relationship. And that evolution may lead to the dissolving of the marriage, but often it brings in a whole new level of depth and truth and true love.
Yeah. There's other relationship therapists and relationship coaches out there that make the big promise that they'll save your marriage. And we're not actually going to make that promise. What our promise is that we'll help end the misery. And that may be in relationship, or it may mean that you so deeply committing to your truth, but doing that in a loving, compassionate, self-responsible way, in that if you do need to leave a relationship, it can be done really consciously, so lovingly. And the gift of doing it in that way is you'll receive the lessons. You'll receive the gifts of what that relationship was asking of you, so that when you do end up in another dynamic, you're not going to be replaying the toxicity or the dysfunction or the unconsciousness that was happening in that other relationship.
100%. And it frees both of you up to meet someone who is a match. And it's been so beautiful to see the girl's dad remarry to a woman. She's the perfect woman for him. Like, I'm so stoked for him. I'm so stoked that my girls get to have her in their lives. And it's a gift. It's like truth will always bring us to the greatest love. That's the power of it.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a long storytelling.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not really surprised. It was a big story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this, if you've got value from it, please like and subscribe or share it with someone who may receive that value as well. We greatly appreciate any support. If you've got any questions that we could answer on this podcast, please send them through. We'd be honoured and delighted to be of service in that way for you.
Yeah, and I do just want to name here, because I'm not sure that we've named it on the podcast, but our brand is Intimacy for Couples. We work with couples, and because of our own path and because we were both on our path prior to being in a relationship, I work with women individually, and Aaron works with men. So do reach out to us if that's, because sometimes one partner's not ready. Sometimes people are on the path of awakened intimacy, but they haven't met their partner yet. So we can support you there. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.